Health Alert is brought to you by OU Physicians in Tulsa. Hello, welcome to Health Alert. I'm Pam Butler. Today we're going to talk about domestic violence, and joining me is Angela Mitchell. She's the Education Coordinator with Domestic Violence Intervention Services, we know as DVIS.
Yes.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, behind your name, before we get started, people will see a lot of letters, lots of letters, alphabet soup almost,
Yes.
almost like mine.
Yes.
What do those letters stand for?
It's actually a certification we had to get through Oklahoma, and they stand for Certified Domestic and Sexual Violence Response Professional.
Okay, and in that certification, is this where you go and actually are educated on how to respond or what kind of questions to ask or not ask? Because sometimes, as just the average citizen, we can be well-intentioned, but we can be saying all the wrong things.
Right. So they send us to a training, very intense training, where we go and learn everything we need to know about domestic and sexual violence, the origins of domestic and sexual violence, all the way up until what is happening now in the fight against domestic violence and sexual assault. And then after that, we're trained to be advocates, speaking on behalf of clients, giving clients information, basically being prepared to work with whatever type of client may come our way.
Okay, now when we think then about domestic violence, is this an area, if we look nationwide or in Oklahoma, you could do it either way you wish, is this an area that is increasing in terms of the incidence of it? Is it decreasing? Is it about the same that it's been over the past 10 or 15 years? Kind of highlight that for us.
Right. Really, the statistics can go either way. Some will think that, yes, domestic violence is increasing, and then some will say that domestic violence is not increasing. We're just actually having more people report now.
Okay.
If you think about 20 years ago, we didn't have as many domestic violence and sexual assault agencies that we do now.
Okay.
There was not a lot of help out. Police officers did not do a lot of work with domestic violence and sexual assault. Our community still treated it as a closed door family issue, and so therefore in 2009 we have a lot of agencies out there now that are able to offer services to victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and we have more advocates now. So now people are just making more reports. So whether or not it's up and down, we really won't be able to tell, but we are happy that more people are now coming forward to get services.
Okay. And it's like you said too, even within law enforcement, they're being educated more and actually taught about domestic violence and how to intervene and seeing it a little bit differently than maybe years ago it was even viewed.
Right.
Now, let me ask you this about domestic violence so we can sort of frame our discussion. When we're talking about domestic violence, exactly who exactly are we talking about? What age category are we talking about? Are we talking about only persons who are in a marital relationship or a dating relationship? I mean, what does domestic violence really incorporate?
Right. Domestic violence is a crime that can affect any and everybody. It doesn't matter what your background is. So at our agency, we see everyone from teenagers all the way up to adults that are in their 50s, 60s, what have you. It really doesn't matter, male or female. I know a lot of people, when we talk about domestic violence, only refer to females as being as victims, but we actually see males that are actually victims as well. Race, religion, socioeconomic status, it does not matter. It affects any and everybody.
Now, when you also talk about sexual assault within that domestic violence arena, you can also be talking about very young children. You mentioned teenagers.
Right.
But can it be even younger than teens?
It can be even younger than teens. Right now, I call dating violence the teenage version of domestic violence. And so we see a rise in dating violence with 11 children that are 11-year-olds. They call them the preteens. We see them 11 through 13. They're experiencing higher sexual rates, which leads to higher dating violence within their age category. So it could start very young and then travel all the way up to older
people.
Older adults.
And, you know, and I think it's really important for people to realize, you just mentioned too, that it's no respecter of person in terms of your background, economic status, or anything. And of course, from time to time, we even hear of those that are the rich and famous, if not infamous, who are engaged in those kinds of activities, and sometimes we appear to be alarmed by it,
Right.
because we think that maybe because of their stature or their money they should be insulated, but it's not an issue related to any of that.
It's not an issue related to that. People think that if you're higher educated or if you are in a higher socioeconomic status, then domestic violence is something that just will not affect your family. That's not true. Because domestic violence is not a respecter of person, it doesn't matter. It's a behavior that is learned by anybody, can be learned by anybody, and then therefore we see it in any type of relationship. And so education is one of the things I have people talk to me all about,
Right.
about all the time. If we educate women, then women are less likely to be affected. Well, I think women that are educated and are in a higher socioeconomic status, they may be more unwilling to come out because of the stigma that society puts on it.
Yes, and I was going to say maybe that is more of the opposite of what you think. They are still being subject to this type of
Right.
violence, but yet they feel that people would say, well, you are so educated, you're so this, how could you have tolerated that? So they don't report as
Exactly.
much because they feel that stigma of people see something's wrong with me because I'm involved in this kind of activity that I don't want to be,
Exactly.
and I don't know how to get out of, but they say
Exactly.
I should know how to get out of.
Yes.
Okay, let me ask this too in terms of looking at domestic violence. You talked about sometimes it's a learned behavior. You did mention that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with that. Is it where children are exposed to this at very young ages, and so they just repeat those patterns as they grow up? Is it due to television programming, watching certain kinds of cartoons when kids are very young? Because the Roadrunner and some of those other people can be pretty violent, you know what I mean?
Right.
And people don't really just pop right back up.
Right.
What are some of the things, how are we learning it, and how do we learn it, and how young?
Right. The United States is definitely a violent-prone society. And so, yes, we teach young people violence through media, books, you name it. They can see violence in any type of form or fashion, but most of the time, young people that live in home where domestic violence is taking place, they're the witnesses to domestic violence. We call them the hidden victims because most of the time we focus on the victim, the adult victim, and the adult perpetrator. Rarely do we focus on the children. But if I have a child that has been in a home where domestic violence has occurred and they've seen or heard what has happened, or they just have been affected by it, a child doesn't have to witness domestic violence in order to experience some of the effects from it if they go to a shelter. And so if I have a child that is in that situation and they don't receive counseling, they don't receive help, they are more likely as an adult to become a victim or a perpetrator of domestic violence. At our agency, about 80% of the guys that come to our agency were abused physically or sexually as children, about 80% of them. So that's a large number. So we know that children in homes where domestic violence occurs are definitely more prone to it as adults.
Okay, let me ask this really quick question, then we are going to go to break and continue. When you think about that, then the person's growing up, the children as they're growing up in these environments, and they're repeating those behaviors, sometimes they're thinking this is normal?
Exactly. Exactly. This is a normal relationship. And so that's why a lot of adults will not call the relationship they're in domestic violence. They won't call it that until they get out, they read some books, they see some literature, seek services. That's when they realize what I was in was a domestic violence relationship. But most people don't realize it's healthy it's normal to have a healthy relationship.
Okay, well, we're going to take a real quick break, Angela, and come back and look at some of the cycle of violence and other things we need to be aware of.
Okay.
Please stay with us. We'll be right back.